Is this journalism?
About today, so let's just jump into it. Starting with, we need to talk about ProPublica getting a school shut down. And they did it by shining a light on abuse, academic neglect, and among other things, inadequate training and staffing.
How about this?
My name is Andrew Callahan, and you're watching Channel 5 News. This episode was filmed at one of the many harm reduction facilities in San Francisco, which provide free access to sterile syringes, clean crack pipes, fresh foil, and so forth. Many local drug users use these services on a daily basis.
Yeah, my name is Dennis. I've been doing fentanyl for some years now.
Do you use any of them?
What about this?
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on this busy Sunday. I'm Lindsay Davis. Tonight, millions in the Northeast are digging out from the first significant snowstorm of the season. And
most people would agree that this is.
Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
Journalism, as defined by Merriam-Webster, is the collection and editing of news for presentation through the media. Traditionally, this media would have just been papers, but thanks to the last 150 years of technological innovation, we live in an increasingly digital world. In our progressively digitally occupied world, our media consumption has become almost dogmatic, with algorithms designed to show us exactly what we want to see, especially when that comes to news and informative media. With the majority of U.S. adults getting news from digital devices, and about half of that news coming from social media sites, we need to be able to more clearly understand what a journalist is in the modern age. To do so, we need to take a philosophical approach to understanding the topic. Baruch Spinoza was a Sephardic Jewish philosopher born in the Netherlands. His major work, Ethics, is a renowned book examining the exact nature of God and Spinoza's own take on moral philosophy. Most of Spinoza's work dispels the Judeo-Christian institutions that most philosophers base their work upon, and instead takes a much more naturalistic approach to God, casting aside any anthropomorphic notions of a big man in the sky. His work take a more pantheistic approach, saying that, opposed to God being the creator of all things are a part or are attributes of God. Outside of the traditional worship of God through the means of prayer, in which a man might believe that God might change nature's laws in his favor, Spinoza argues on the behalf of a search for knowledge and epistemology to an extent, effectively arguing that a more well-informed person is a more pious one. Spinoza said, "The highest activity a human being can attain is learning for understanding, because to understand is to be free." This particular quote holds significance to the matter at hand, considering journalism, regardless of if you consider it an activity or a profession or any other facet in society, it aims to help people understand the world around them in a more informed way. America's founding fathers understood this when they included freedom of the press as a part of the Constitution. Historically, journalism has been tied to institutions like a newspaper, radio station, or TV channel. But in an age where the majority of the people get their news from social media or other digital platforms, how does the role of a journalist change? How can we start to craft a new perception of journalism? To start, let's expand upon the previously established definition of journalism by looking at Spinoza's parameters on what constitutes an adequate idea, or in layman's terms, a fact. From Stanford's Encyclopedia of Philosophy, a true idea means nothing other than knowing a thing perfectly, or in the best way. It involves grasping a thing's casual and conceptual connections not just to other objects, but, more importantly, to the attributes of God, the infinite modes of the laws of nature, that follow immediately from them, and the common notions that pick out features present in all modes of an attribute. This would mean, in order to understand a topic or idea concretely, you must know exactly where it stands in the categorization of all things in our knowledge, touching again on Spinoza's influence on epistemology. As it relates back to journalism, Spinoza's take on knowledge and ideas as things that sit in a definite location among all things can also help us observe misinformation and disinformation as they relate back to modern media professionals. Misinformation, in short, is getting the facts wrong but still presenting them, whereas disinformation is intentionally spreading false information to mislead people. In our modern media landscape, a clear distinction to the two would be the difference between a major news organization like, say, CNN, failing on sloppy reporting on a story versus Alex Jones having to pay a lawsuit of billions of dollars to the families of Sandy Hook victims after intentionally spreading lies about the massacre in 2012. While not a religious pursuit in the slightest, we can draw a distinction in faith in those pursuing media in this day and age. The distinction of being a journalist has to do with reporting on the facts at hand in good faith with the public benefit in mind. Amber Bracken is a Canadian photojournalist whose work has frequented the pages of the New York Times and the National Geographic. In 2021, she was covering a protest on a pipeline being installed in Indigenous lands in Canada and was arrested for it. In court, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police would later argue that Bracken was not engaged in good faith journalism by embedding herself with the protesters, something never before illegal in Canada. What ensued was a brief civil suit between the gas company installing the pipeline and Bracken, in which the gas company had to later drop their suit. Bracken's example highlights the distinction between good faith journalism and the bias we apply to someone covering a subject we would deem controversial, immediately assuming that they have negative intentions. We can also use our good faith interpretations of Spinoza's thoughts on knowledge in order to critique those acting in bad faith. During the Arab Spring protests occupying the Middle East in early 2011, hyperlocal journalism was needed, and with the advent of things like Twitter and YouTube being on the rise at the time, digital journalism was at the forefront of coverage on the protests. A Gay Girl in Damascus was a blog being written by someone claiming to be Amina Arif, a queer girl living in Syria at the time. The blog covered everything from government crackdowns to love stories to this, that, and the other thing having to do with living as someone in Syria at the time. After months of steady internet fame, Amina seemingly disappeared for a week under the guise of kidnapping after her writing was deemed too controversial. In reality, it wasn't until a week later when the truth came out. Amina was really Tom McMaster, an American writer in Scotland trying to make factually sound arguments about the Middle East without coming from a white perspective. Arguments that would then spin out of control and become an alter ego for his writing. McMaster was later lampooned for his actions, but more importantly, single-handedly delegitimized the blogs of Syrian activists actively looking to cover the crisis in good faith. In essence, McMaster was not acting in good faith in his coverage of the crisis, instead using it as an excuse to work on his fictional writing capabilities and not to better serve the public knowledge. In conclusion, by applying Spinoza's God as a concretely knowable thing to our pursuit of journalism in the modern age, we can use his interpretation of faith or pursuit of knowledge to determine whether or not sharing information is or is not a journalist by examining the faith in which they have put behind their work. This has been Isaac Linsk, signing off.